Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. A Glimpse of the Kingdom can remain free because of generous donors like you. If you'd like to donate, feel free to do so online, or you can send payments through Facebook Messenger. Don't forget to tell your friends about it so that they can enjoy this ministry as well. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any podcasts.
You can listen to my daddy every single day, like in the gym, in the car, or just at home. Glimpse of the Kingdom is awesome!
I go back and listen to some of my podcasts sometimes and just to see how bad they are, good they are, whatever. And I notice things, sometimes I go, oh, that's not exactly what I meant to say, or whatever it was, like the time I talked about the Vulgate. And the other day, I know you've been really bothered by this, but I mentioned the apocryphal Acts of Mary. Someone asked the question, I think it was, it doesn't matter. Someone asked the question, what about we hear that Jesus might have been married to Mary? And you'll see that every once in a while. I think it was in the Da Vinci Code. I meant to say the Acts of Philip. Now, Philip, the apostle, did not write it. It's an apocryphal act. And we don't even know, it says something Jesus blank blank Mary and something blank blank disciples, and they didn't, and blank blank. I mean, it's so fragmentary.
It could have been he married somebody else.
Well, the word Mary's not even there. It could have been anything. The people, conspiracy theorists, like to go, what was blanked out?
Yeah.
Now, that's missing from the fragment. We have one fragment. It's worthless. The point is it's from the Acts of Philip. So if you want to do a Google search and look up your Act of Philip, you can. It's up to you. Go for it. The other thing is, I said last week when we were talking about morality, I talked about moral intuition, Roman numeral 3. Roman numeral 3. I said, how do we apprehend morality? I said some deny it, and we talk about whether moral emotions are thought, and then intuition. I mentioned antisocial disorder and, of course, psychopathy. That is, people who do not have an awareness of the moral law. I said abhorrent. I used the word abhorrent. I've used the word disgusting and so forth. I didn't mean, and I listened to it, I thought, I didn't nuance that well. I didn't mean the people themselves are necessarily abhorrent and disgusting. I meant the logical inferences, the logical conclusions, are that it would mean I can rape and it's not immoral because we would deny it. There's no sense of being a moral issue. I'm saying that is abhorrent. I don't think, therefore, the people who might suffer from that disorder are unlovable or something like that. So just to be clear, God loves the psychopath. Some of you are glad about that right now. Deborah feels welcome right now. I don't say my name, but we're so glad that all psychopaths are. I'm just kidding. So they're loved too, but so when I use the word, I do think, nevertheless, that some do deny it. Okay. Real quickly, let's do about a 60-second review, but a little bit longer, because there's a lot of new faces, but I know that some of this is brand new. We talked about the big concept of metaethics. Metaethics is how to talk about morality. It's a very abstract thing. Not everyone likes that because it is so abstract, but it's a concept of how do we talk about and how do we think about morality. And in essence, I focused on, as most ethicists do, and that is on the prescriptive morality, that it's an ought feeling. I'm a cognitivist. I believe that moral statements, letter B, I think it's, well, I forget, because your outline. No, it's your outline, letter B. I'm a cognitivist. I believe that moral statements refer to things that are actually factual. An emotivist or non-cognitivist thinks that when I make a moral statement, I'm really just talking about my feelings or my preferences. So if I say rape is wrong, a non-cognitivist would say, you just mean you don't prefer it. No, I'm a cognitivist. I believe that rape is wrong. It's something about the universe. It's a fact. About reality, that's a fact. Letter C is, I also said, there's a difference between a realist and a relativist. That is the actual moral values themselves. I'm a realist. I think moral values are objectively true. So they refer to things that are actually real. Refer to things that are actually real. It is a fact of the universe. So I think moral statements refer to real things. I think moral values refer to real things. That is to say, objective does not mean everyone agrees with it. It's objective in that it refers to something real that is independent. So, for example, if 2 + 2 = 4, and you didn't know that, it still equals 4. Whether you knew it or not, whether you believed it or not, it's just a fact the way it is. I'm from Mississippi originally. Well, whether you believe that or not, it's a fact. It's objective. That is exactly where I'm from. Your belief is irrelevant to the matter because I know what the truth is. It's like that with objective or realism, an objective understanding of morality. I think that honor is good across all cultures it's true. And I gave the analogy, it's a common one. If Hitler had won the war, the doctrine proposed by that particular form of government, of Nazism, if they all won, and all of Germany, they multiply, now there's 50 million Germans who all agree, yay, we should kill the Jews, they're still wrong. That is, we don't take a vote on it. And so if everyone in the world got convinced, I'd say they're still wrong. It's objective. It's something that's not dependent on each person's understanding of it. That's my view. It doesn't have to be your view, but it is mine. And the opposite is are relativist. And then letter D, I talk about morality versus social etiquette versus law. When we talk about, and I said most confusion when it comes to morality is not distinguishing well between a moral value and how to express it. I gave the analogy of if I want to show honor to a person in America, I typically shake hands. You got to shake hands how? If you're a man, firmly. Stand up straight, son. Shake a hand firmly. Well, why'd I do that? It's not a random arbitrary. Well, it's arbitrary in that social etiquette, but what's not arbitrary is the value I'm trying to express. I'm honoring the person. If I'm Asian, I'm going to bow to them. I don't shake their hand, I bow. And there's things like that. For example, in Japanese culture, I've been told that you don't want to give a business card when it's cold. You want to give them a business card of yours that's warm because it demonstrates who you are. And you're trying to show honor to the person and respect who you are. So social etiquette can change from culture to culture, and it does. That's okay. And so what I encourage you to just think about, what's the value beneath it? And I said the distinction versus law is just because it's legal doesn't mean it's moral. Just because it's illegal doesn't mean it's immoral. And that the law does often legislate a moral issue, absolutely. But not everything the law legislates is moral. And in my opinion, humble opinion, people get that all messed up and think that every single legal issue is moral. And people often say, well, is it moral or not? Well, it's legal. It's not what I asked you. And so the issue is it moral or not? And those are different things. So when I talk about moral values, I'm not just saying what the Constitution says or what Kansas state law says and the government. I'm also not talking about social etiquette, because we can disagree on social etiquette. We're talking about morality is something very different. How do we learn the good? That's the question of moral epistemology, and there's different ways to learn it. And that's fine, but just because we learn it doesn't mean it's relative. I was taught mathematics. That doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. 2 + 2 does not equal horse or tree. That would be silly. Well, I was taught 4. That doesn't mean it's relative. It just means I was taught it. That's like that with morality. But it's a question of how we learn it. You say, well, you learned it from your parents. Therefore, there are no such thing as objective moral. That doesn't follow logically. It doesn't matter how you learned it. It matters if it's objective or if it's a moral value or not. Then we talked about how do we apprehend morality. Some deny it, that we don't ever. And I said, and then I say the people who say that probably do suffer from a serious disorder. Unless you're just a philosopher, then you get paid to say those things and write books. But most people who really do believe you can apprehend morality, you have a serious disorder and you should get treatment. And then we talked about, some people say we apprehend morality by our emotions, some say thought. That's fine. I think both are affected, but I think letter C is the best explanation. I think that philosophers who say this are right, that our moral intuition, and intuition is that immediate, direct sense of something being true. Now what's key there is we trust our intuition all the time in daily life, all the time. And so if we doubt our intuition on this, the question is why not doubt it on every other time we have to rely upon it. And I gave several examples, analogies of my brain could be an alien ship and so forth. There's a degree to which intuitively I think you're existing and I am too, and I'm talking to minds and you can understand me. There's a degree to my intuition tells me it's right. And we're justified to believe in intuition until we have a defeater, until someone says, here's why your intuition shouldn't be trusted. And that does happen sometimes. It does. And that's fine. We just listen to defeaters. Another example of that, and I gave an analogy a couple weeks ago, and I'll keep doing it as time goes on in different studies we do. I'm convinced that I've had several religious experiences by God himself, or by Jesus or the Spirit or an angel, whatever. But God kind, I'm convinced of that. I'm really, really convinced of it. I'm convinced I've had those experiences like I'm convinced I'm married. So it's the level of probability of belief where I use the word no. I don't use the word certain, because I don't have anything in life of which I'm certain. But I do use the word knowledge. I know God exists. I don't believe Christianity is true. I know Christianity is true. There's different. I know that God exists. And one of the reasons why I know he exists and I know Christianity is true is because of my intuition. I've had religious experiences. So the way to disabuse me of that belief is you have to demonstrate a defeater to my intuitive function. You have to demonstrate I'm delusional. So I'm justified to believe my intuitive sense of my religious experience until you show otherwise. That's how it works in argument. Now, that's not the only reason why I know it's true. And I've told you this before, again, it's worth saying, that mixed with my corroborating historical evidence, it's that they're married very, very nicely. And I wrote a whole book to tell why I think these things go together. Anyway. So we trust intuition all the time. I think we do the same thing with morality. And I think that's good. Why be good? That depends on which moral system. We're going to talk about that maybe tonight if we get to it. Later on, I think room number 8, we're going to talk about why be good. There's different answers to that question. And then what is good? We talked about descriptive versus foundational. But I want to pause on values and duties, and that catches up to speed. Let me do values and duties, and I'm going to pause, and then we can ask any questions for clarity or content. Remind yourselves that when we're talking about moral values and duties, we aren't talking about moral values and moral duties. So for example, when I say I have values, I value my wife, that's not a moral value. She would say, yes, it is, but it's not. It's not a moral value. A moral value is something like honesty, preservation of human life, justice, fairness, loyalty, these kinds of things. That's a moral value. A moral duty is which value I'm supposed to uphold in that moment. What is obligatory for me to do in the moment? And I'm going to say a lot more about that when we get to Rome number 8. So I'm sorry, but this is the way it's got to be. I'll keep saying if you'll wait, because we'll get bogged down in definitions and you'll get more confused. I'm trying to do this in sequence. But that's the distinction between values and duties. If I'll say the analogy, and it's probably worth repeating later on too. C.S. Lewis, as usual, gives the perfect analogy. He says, imagine a piano keyboard, right? So you have black and white keys where they play the piano. The keys, black and white, are he calls them instincts. I would use the word values. Those are the instincts or values that everybody has. The moral law tells us which notes to push. The moral law is the sheet music. The instincts are the values I would use in moral philosophy. The values are the keys. So to use this vocabulary, we would say moral values are the keys. The moral law tells us which one to push, though which one to push is the duty. You have a duty to push that key. And they're different. And that's why I think, as last week Tom said, so are moral values on a different scale, a sliding scale? And I said, yes, depending on the situation. And when we get to Rome number 8, I will explain what I mean by that.
A lot of times our morals are based on how we're raised, even though you talk about intuition.
Yes?
So if someone's raised in a culture that isn't Western civilization, that is, we base most of our morals on the Bible. Or bringing up because of what our parents have told us or what we have learned throughout the culture. But there are some cultures that don't do that. Like in a brutal culture, I don't want to, like some of the things that we've seen on TV lately, Islam, they get radical. And if you are raised in, not all, but some, if you're raised in that culture and they teach you this is what's moral, then does your intuition say, no, that's wrong? Or is it, that is how you're raised, so that is what you think is moral? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad we got that straight.
Yeah, we got that straight out. That's a good question, and good application, frankly. And it reminds me of my analogy that C.S. Lewis gives about killing witches, and I'll come back to that. Back to Roman number 2, I said this last time, moral epistemology. In essence, most philosophers say, and I use a little simple way of saying, it's either taught or caught. And David asked the question, but is there a fine line? Like with children, they seem to sometimes be taught, and my response, a lengthy response, was it seems to be the case in experience that it's both and. That some adults still need to be taught it, and some kids seem to have caught it earlier than others. And so it's both taught and caught. And so in moral philosophy and moral ontology, which we'll get to in just a second, those are both okay to say. It's certainly okay to say. Again, like mathematics, I can discover something and go, I get it. Did you know if you do a diameter of the circle, 3.14, blah, blah? Well, they've known that for centuries. Well, I just figured that out. So I can catch it, figure it out, intuit it, or I can be taught it, and I come to the same conclusion. So those both go together. What about religions? And so then you said, we get our morals from the Bible. I'm going to have a lot more to say about that when we get past your handout, because I haven't finished the handout yet. My response to that is yes and no. My view, and many New Testament biblical interpreters, are that you don't have to have the Bible to understand morality. And I'll say a lot more about that later on, but it's one of the most common misunderstandings amongst non-Christians, particularly who are, this is a generalization, but mean atheists, mean skeptics. You and your Bible is all stupid and you're full of God's a moral monster and all that, Dawkins and so forth. The assumption there, they think that they'll go, look at the Ten Commandments. I don't need the Ten Commandments. No, it's not good to murder. My response is, you're right. And the text never says otherwise. So it's not that the Bible is written so that now I know it's not good to murder. All this time, I didn't know. And they're just around killing and pillaging until Moses came down the mountain. That's silly. And that's why my sermon, I said over and over and over, the function of a covenant. I never said it's to lay down the perfect society and teach them morality. I never once said that on purpose. And if I had a lot more time, I would love to go on all what we're doing now. So the answer is, do we get morality from the Bible? Yes and no. I'm going to give you some examples of what I think do come from the Bible that I do not think most people do intuit. And we'll talk about that. Here's one case example. In Christianity, one of the chief values that Christians believe in Christianity teaches. Try to make that distinction, because not all Christians believe this, and they're wrong not to believe it. In Christianity, it teaches that humility is a chief virtue. Most cultures around the world do not believe that. And in fact, the Romans fought against it. Some things I think are revealed, like Jesus being a mathematician and go, let me show you the Pythagorean theorem. You didn't know it. You can't figure this out. So I'll talk a lot more about the role of the Bible later if I can, a lot more about the role of the Bible. And then what about your example of Islam? From what I understand, and I've studied Islam a lot, even at the PhD, master's and PhD level, and I've talked to Muslims, but I'm not a specialist, but I've researched a lot. In general, if you examine the moral values beneath why they do what they do, I'm convinced we would concur with the values, quite frankly. I think that if we were convinced that people were in a country who were literally, actually fueled by Satan himself, who were hell-bent on killing our families, there's a large argument to be made that the best kind thing to do is to kill them before they kill everyone else. Like my analogy with C.S. Lewis he gave about witches. If we really thought witches existed and they could, from their jail cell, cast spells to kill people at will, we'd make an easy argument with Christianity. We've got it in their lives because they are a danger to society. We lock people up for that, but what if locking them up couldn't change it? Well, in Islam, that's what they think about you and me. Well, they think that because we let women drive on the road, we let women read, we let women vote. And so we're convinced that they call us the great Satan. And so they would think, well, the natural thing is you've got to end them. But you corroborate that in their mind with certain text from the Quran and also from the Surah, these sayings of Muhammad and the Hadith, life about him, that not only suggested, they tell the person to go kill the infidel, and then they're told on top of that by various sheikhs and different leaders that you will not only, you're morally obligated to do it because it's the right thing to do and because he commands it, and there's future benefit. You get 70 virgins, your family will be taken care of, there'll be honor given to your family. And so you add up all these values, that's why they do what they do. When they think it makes their God happy to drive planes into buildings, they're going to do what they think makes God happy. So the question is not the moral values, I would suggest, in my view, not the moral values aren't at stake. The difference is whether or not those moral values are understood based on the facts, like the analogy of the witches. If we really thought those facts were true of women who sold their souls to Satan, then we would have the same moral values and apply them, our duties would be applied differently based on the facts. And if we really thought God had commanded us to go kill the infidel, it would change our duties. The moral values don't change. So then the question is, did God really command those duties? That's really the ultimate question. That's why the understanding of the Muslim conception of God versus the Christian conception of God are so very important, because we can't both be right. We both do think there is a God. We both think that God issues commands, which tonight we're going to get to in just a minute. So God does give us moral duties. The question is, are either one of us right? So to me, it's the issue of duty more than it is the value. We value Scripture. We value obeying God. We value being faithful. We value honoring our family. All the same things they would say, just in Arabic. That's a short description, so that's what I think. And that's why typically they're just so evil. I mean, even the Nazis. I mean, I've read some of Mein Kampf, Hitler's book. It's a gargantuan volume, but I've read chunks of it in Mein Kampf, and he doesn't just say, I just want to go murder people. He's convinced, and many, many people were, for anti-Semitism took centuries to build up. It didn't happen overnight. They were convinced that Jews were the bane of existence. They made the argument that, and therefore they were convinced that Jews really were the reason for the fall of the Roman Empire, and they're for everything. Much like Muslims think we're the infidel and we're the great Satan, they thought Jews were that. And so every painting, every picture described the Jew had horns, and every time you see them, they got this natural disgust of, you're not even human, you're not fully human because you're fueled by Satan. And so how could they kill those people? Well, they didn't really think they're people. They didn't want to kill people. So that's why you have to degrade Jews to somewhat human. It's exactly what you have to do to enslave a population, which is what Americans did to slaves. They're not fully human. They get 3/5 a vote because they're not fully human yet. And so you do all kinds of things that aren't human. They're animals. So it's not the moral values that change, it's the facts of the beliefs about existence that changed. Well, I think they're wrong. I don't think Jews are fueled by Satan. I don't think the reason for the downfall. I don't think I'm the infidel fueled by Satan. I don't think black people or Mexicans or anybody are less human. But those are facts about reality, not the moral value. You see the distinction? The big distinction. Okay. So it's a hard argument to make that Nazis just ignored moral values. Instead, we would disagree very much about the role of Jews and gypsies and so forth, whether they're human or not, or whether or not they're the cause for the downfall. Now that's in general. I don't know of every single thought of every German and every Nazi. Sorry, Nazi, not German. But. Okay, any other questions or comments on that happy note? Okay, row number 6. Moral ontology. Where does good come from? Where does it come from? So let me just do a quick review real quickly. So how do we learn the good? That's epistemology. How do you define good? That's moral semantics. Where does good come from? That's the moral ontology. And the way people typically like to talk about this idea of where it comes from, or ontology, you hear this word often. It is grounding, or the ground. What is the ground of morality? That is, what's base level brute fact about it? How do you ground morality? I use the word, where does it come from? I think that's a little easier to understand. Maybe, maybe not. And there are 3 or 4, 5 major explanations, as far as I can tell in the literature, and that's why I give them here. The first 3 are the typical way that most people today say it who are not theists, and I'll talk about it in a second. So one of the most common is to say, well, science. We learn morality from science. Now, science, of course, is really short for scientific method. Science itself comes from the Latin word, which means knowledge. And that's a misnomer. I mean, it is the word etymology, but the scientific method, they would say science can tell us. That's where we get morality. And that's a very common answer for a lot of scientists. They will say, That's where it comes from. And you can go read the arguments for that. You can go read, say, Sam Harris. It's called The Moral Landscape, his book. Sam Harris's book. He's a neuroscientist, he's an atheist, and he believes science tells us. And you can read, some smart scientists who say that. I don't find that compelling. I'm not sure what possible scientific apparatus would demonstrate what I ought to do. See, science tries to suggest what is, and then makes predictions. And it tries to look for cause and effect. If I drop this, I go, look, it fell. Why? That's the effect. What happened? What caused it? Why let go of it? Okay, but why did it go this direction? And so we look for a cause. Okay, then we find that out, and then because something else. Then we try to get to ultimate cause, and eventually we'll go back to the beginning of the universe, and then maybe a multiverse, and then past that we just stop. And so science tries to figure out everything that happens in a chain of events. Okay, but that's an is, and I'll say more about that in a second. So I don't find it compelling I can't think of a possible scientific apparatus or experiment that would demonstrate, again, what I ought to do, what I should do, and that's what morality is. It feels like and is a commandment. I don't see how possibly what possible way we could figure that out. There's more there, but I'm just very brief on this. Letter B is naturalism. Naturalism is the belief in general that all that exists is nature, so matter and energy. The analogy I like to give is a fishbowl. Me and you are sitting in a fish, floating around in a fishbowl. Well, there's like John and I were talking about the universe, and I put little pictures on your table there to show you the different fields of science and nature. But John said, I think the universe goes on forever and ever. He told me right before the study. And I said, maybe so. But like the fishbowl analogy, that me and John are fishing the fishbowl, and I go, John, do you think there's anything out there? And he goes, nope, fishbowl goes forever. You just haven't swam far enough. You'll see that you're never going to hit the edge. What if I said, no, I think there is an edge and there's something outside of there? A naturalist would say, this is all there is. You can swim as long as you want. All that exists is matter and energy. And that's why, and there's different forms of naturalists, but when I do How I Know Christianity is True, I'll explore more of that later, but I'm not doing that right now. But in general, everything can be explained by matter and energy. Is the bottom figure. In general, that's what naturalist is. Okay, most scientists are also naturalists, but naturalism is a philosophy. It's not a method. You can have a naturalistic method. You can have a naturalistic methodology, but that and scientific method usually go hand in hand. They're not exactly the same, but so it's a philosophical worldview. If you're convinced all that exists in matter and energy, then morality has to be something made of matter or energy, because it's all that exists. I don't find that compelling. Let me tell you 3 reasons why I think it's devastating to this belief that morality arises in nature as matter and energy. I think 3 devastating things. One is you have to figure out what are the physical properties of moral values. For example, how much does justice weigh? What's the wavelength of honesty? What color is loyalty? I mean, these are silly things to ask, because we all know morality doesn't work that way. It's not made of matter and energy. And so, no, you have to go down to, you have to measure it, and science has to be measurable. And if we can't measure it now, they would say eventually we can measure it. You don't have the apparatus now. But what are the possible physical properties of moral values? I think that's, frankly, silly. I don't think moral values have physical properties at all. The second reason is the second major problem with naturalism is that this commits what's called the naturalistic fallacy. The naturalistic fallacy. And a guy named David Hume was still is a well-known philosopher. David Hume, he wrote a book called A Treatise of Human Nature. He wrote over a series of time, I'd say around 1738 to 1740. So he's been dead for a while. But Humean philosophy has been around. It still infects, I said infect, a little bit of a slip. It still affects a lot of people, particularly scientists. He called this the naturalistic fallacy. And later on, a British philosopher named G.E. Moore wrote the Principia Ethica in 1903. And in essence, it comes down to this. It's called the is-ought fallacy. If you were saying it, a naturalistic fallacy is what it's officially called, but in colloquial terms, they call it the is-ought fallacy. And basically, it's basically this. You can't get an ought from an is. You can't get an ought from an is. You just can't do it. It's a naturalistic fallacy. It's an is-ought fallacy. If I went out there and the wind's blowing today and the leaves fall down on the ground, I go, look at that pattern on the ground. Look at that stuff leaves. Man, it should have happened that way. It ought to have happened. And Deborah goes, what do you mean it ought to have happened? It ought to have happened that way. If it didn't do that way, it would have been breaking a moral value. And that's just silly, Deborah would say. The wind blew it. It's completely random. No, that leaf shouldn't have landed there. It should have known better. That means it's just silly. That water over the cliff fell down, we call it a waterfall. Why did it do that? Because it's, we would say, obeying the laws of nature. Morality is a sense of oughtness. So just because something occurs in nature doesn't mean it should have behaved otherwise. Trees fall where they do, waterfalls form where they do, animals are driven by their instincts and so forth. So if naturalism is true, the morality, an oughtness, they're saying comes out of nature itself. Logically, that's absurd. You can't get an ought from an is. You just can't do it. You can't say just because it happened that way, even if I've predicted it, it morally should have done that or should not have done that. It's just nature. It's just throw the pebble in the water and it ripples. It's not a moral thing. It just did it. The third thing is, if naturalism is true, which it's not, if it were true, it would mean that everything that exists is matter and energy, okay? Which means everything in the universe, including your happy self, that's your happy self, and let's say the brain inside yourself. If you're what's called I'm sorry, I have to introduce these terms. If you're a physicalist, that's a naturalist who believes that you don't have a soul or a mind, you're just a brain. There's no you, your brain, you is a composite of brain matter. You can be a naturalist and not a physicalist. They can say, well, no, a soul arose in a different kind of way from nature. I don't find that compelling at all. I think if you're going to be a naturalist, go all in and be a physicalist, be consistent. But if you are that, the problem with being a naturalist is that means even the things in your brain right now, the chemicals that are going and firing in your synapses, those are all driven and governed by the laws of nature. And letter C, we'd say, and evolutionary desires and impulses. Well, if that's the case, if your brain is nothing but, remember those commercials? This is your brain. This is your brain's on drugs. I just remembered those. If your brain really is eggs frying, you can't help but think the things you think. Why? Because there's no you to think it. Your brain, and right now even the thoughts you have, however the good or happy or neutral they are, they're not up to you because you don't have a will. And that's the problem. Because this turns into physical determinism. It means you have to do this. Not in a moral sense, but you are driven, you are controlled by naturalistic impulses in the universe. Well, physical determinism means I don't have moral responsibility, which means morality is a delusion. It's just a delusion. It's just, in other words, when I feel like I really ought to go help that neighbor down the street, the person who tripped, and I feel like I ought to, that's a delusion. You don't ought to nothing. Your brain's just firing off synapses randomly, and it's non-directed, it's undirected. There's no other anything else, it's just matter and energy. I mean, I can't help but do otherwise because of the non-rational chemical changes in my brain caused by the laws of physics. Well, but that's not what morality is. Morality is not an is, it's not a determinism. But you have to be a determinist if you're a naturalist. Well, sorry. Logically, you should be. Some naturalists are straight up determinists. They'll say, yeah, I am, and I'm go all in. Others say, no, I'm not. And I think Sam Harris is one, if you remind me, I think Sam Harris, as a naturalist, is not a determinist. He says we still have a sense of free will. There's no explanation for their free will, but it's just a delusion. They would say we act like we have a free will, but we really don't. You act like you're loving someone, but you're not. You act like you did the right thing when you told the truth, but you didn't. Your brain's just firing off various chemicals in your naturalism. So, I don't think moral values have physical properties. I don't think you can measure them. I don't think they have moral values. It commits the naturalistic fallacy. You cannot get an ought from an is, ever. And 3, it would mean our brains, we don't have a self, we have a brain with chemicals firing off based on the laws of physics. Which means there's no such thing as morality. My brain feels like that, but it's just a delusion. So, I don't think naturalism answers the question of where do morals come from. I don't find that compelling. There's more reasons against it, but those are my big 3 that I have. Others say evolution did it. Evolution is where we get them from. Where we get them from. Well, I have 4 major reasons why I find this uncompelling. Am I with you so far? Are you with me? You tracking? Talk to me if you're not, okay. 1, my question is, how, if evolution is true, and let's grant it is, okay, of all this, some people get real worked up about that. Let's assume it is, and by evolution I mean the typical scientific, that is to say, all species of living forms on Earth come back in a common ancestor to a tree, to original, all the way back to just proteins that formed at some point, probably in a cosmic goo, that then trickle down to all that we know. One massive family tree. Let's assume that's true. Then the question is, how is morality passed on in genes? Which chromosomes are moral? See, that's nonsense to me. Morality is not a chromosome. Morality is not a gene. So even if evolution is true, why would morality pass down in genes? Not my blue genes, but right. What DNA? What? I mean, ABC, whatever the chromosome. What is the 4 of them? AB. It's AC and GA. See, exactly. That's how wrong I am. GTC, that one. Okay. Those 4. It means we have to find out one of those chromosomes or one composite part of a protein equals morality. But no one thinks that. I mean, no one thinks that. It's DNA isn't moral. It's DNA. It's information that tells the cells how to build proteins and structures at minimum. So morality can't be passed down genetically because morality is not that kind of thing. Values and loyalty and telling the truth and preservation of human life isn't part of the chromosome. That doesn't make any sense. That's one major problem with saying evolution is where morality comes from. But two, this would be to deny moral oughtness. It takes away the ought or the should, which means morality no longer means what everyone means by the term. Because it would mean that what we call moral is really just the herd instinct. It's a social convention, which means morality is just an illusion. It's just the herd instinct. So you think it's good to tell the truth, but it's not really good to tell the truth. It's not a moral good. It just helps the herd to survive because of evolutionary impulses that helps your species survive. It's not good to tell the truth. It's good for your survival. Well, that's different. That is to say it's functional, but it's not good. But it is functional, they would say. Which means you think morality is a good thing, but it really is just simply an illusion. Before it's a delusion, I think, but now it's just an illusion. Here's a well-known quote by Michael Ruse. Michael Ruse is a philosopher of science. Michael Ruse, you ought to do his, you can read his books. Michael Ruse is, it's hard not to mimic him. He does that. So it's hard, you have to pay attention past the ahs. And a nice guy, good sense of humor. I just find him very wrong. But anyway, he's a philosopher of science, and he writes this, quote, "The position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is a biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. That's all it is. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, love thy neighbor as thyself, they think they're referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation or grounding. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory." And I've heard him in interviews. Do you really believe that? Do you really? He goes, yes. I mean, so he wishes it were different. He wishes, but he's just being consistent. He said, that's it. I did. So, and saying about love, like he loves his family. He goes, I know that's what I say, but I don't love them. I have a biochemical response to my family, and I hope that they survive and pass on my genes. That's it. So I think it's good to tell the truth as long as it helps the herd instinct. But that's all it is, a herd instinct. Well, I don't find that compelling at all. I don't think morality is illusion, but you're being consistent, and that's what you have to say if you think evolution is where it comes from. You would have to say that. You have to be consistent, and I appreciate that very much about him. He goes all in. He's not the only one. This isn't like some weirdo. I could give you other quotes. But, again, I don't find that compelling. It gets rid of completely of the sense of oughtness. It just means it's illusion. I don't think morality is illusion. My intuition tells me it's not illusion. 3, the third major problem is it commits speciesism. The arbitrary superiority of human flourishing. Virtually every single ethicist, naturalist, atheist, anybody says that humans are different and valuable and so forth. Well, that's just arbitrary. There is no reason to treat humans as worthy of honor or respect any more than microbes on tree bark.
What did you say that was behind this arbitrary what?
An arbitrary superiority of human flourishing. Arbitrary, that is, it's arbitrary. In fact, they would say it's self-serving, because it is, it's evolution. Well, it's good to be honest to other humans because it helps me flourish. Who cares? This C.S. Lewis is right. Why is it good to flourish? Why is it good to tell the truth? Well, it helps the herd. Why is it good to help the herd? Because it helps me survive. It's like asking, why is it good to be? You shouldn't be selfish. You should be unselfish. Why? Because it helps the herd survive. Well, I care if the herd survives. Because the herd dies, I die. So the reason to be unselfish is because you might die? That doesn't make any sense. That is, you're being unselfish for selfish reasons. It doesn't make any sense at all. But speciesism is the belief that humans are special, and so we have to be good. So what makes it good is, well, humans are. But no one thinks that. No one thinks I've committed an atrocity. Most people don't. If I kill an ant that just bit me, and no one puts that in the moral value as killing a human. If I squashed a baby and squashed an ant, no one goes, they're the same. Everybody, even a naturalist, will go, they're different. Babies are different. Why is that? Well, they're more developed. What do you mean they're more developed? Biologically, they're more adaptations. Okay, but see, that becomes arbitrary. So not only is it speciesism because I'm arbitrarily picking humans, then I'm giving humans traits that are arbitrarily more superior than ants. It's just arbitrary, which means there's no such thing as morality. It's just an illusion. Number 4, the fourth major reason is, and this makes them mad, and so let me nuance this correctly. Listen, if evolutionary is true, and only if it's only true, what I mean is if that really is the only game in town, we are advanced primates on the speck of dust. You might say we're just advanced. Well, let's drop the just. Some people get upset about that. But they would say we are just. We're advanced primates on the speck of dust. Think how huge the universe is. What possible reason would I need to be moral if your survival got in the way of mine? If the goal is survival, why not get rid of every person who gets in my way and steal and lie and murder and pillage and rape and do whatever I want to do, since it helps guarantee my survival? What possible reason would tell me no? This doesn't mean that evolutionists are necessarily more apt to go murder and go steal and go whatever. I'm not saying they do. I'm not saying they do. Say that one more time. I'm not saying they do. It doesn't mean you believe in evolution, or if you're an atheist, you're more apt to go murder than I am. I didn't say what you actually do. I'm asking a moral question. What would be the moral reason to say, no, you shouldn't? You shouldn't do that. Hitler in Mein Kampf and other places makes the exact argument, as eugenics did all the time. You should, they argued, should make sure you end the species that get in the way of yours. You should end species or anything at all that gets in the way of your own survival. Yeah, it became social Darwinism. My response to this is, that's despicable. My question is, why? Why is it? Richard Dawkins, he has several books that talks about this. One of his books called The Selfish Gene. He says, we're at bottom selfish genes. That's all they want to do is propagate their species. It wants to have sex. It wants to do whatever it wants all to survive. And he says, nevertheless, we shouldn't do that. We should fight for a virtuous society. Which all the respondents go, and why is that, Richard? Probably to say, because I don't want you to think I'm like Hitler. But you said something different than Hitler. That's true. But the question is, why? Why should I fight for a virtuous society? What possible difference does it make? I really am asking the question, what difference does it make? Because if we're just on a speck of dust as primates, it means there is no moral ground not to do it. There's no moral ground not to do it. None. I was listening to a guy the other day in an interview, and he said he was a British guy, and he said for a long time he practiced this. He's like, and he He took it to his logical conclusion and became what's called a nihilist, which is nothing matters. There are no moral ground. It doesn't matter at all. And he said, I lived that way for a while. And I mean, he did. He drank, lived life. He did whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. He said, I act like that. Nothing what I did mattered at all. He just said, and then I stopped because I realized it wasn't helping, what did he say? It wasn't helping life flourish and other humans flourish. And if I were on that radio interview, I would say, what difference does that make? What difference does it make? Typically at this point, in debates when I've heard people bring this up, usually it's an atheist against a Christian. Usually the atheist will say, that's just silly. We all know we shouldn't murder. We all know we shouldn't be selfish. My response is, that's correct. I think that's true, except for psychopaths. The question is, if we know it's wrong to do it, where does this oughtness come from? On your view and evolutionary claims, it doesn't come from anywhere. It's a herd instinct that tells me it helps to survive. But if you get in the way of my survival, why not shouldn't I just end you on the spot? Every one of you are cutting down my ability to get food, fresh water. You're cutting off my resources. Every one of you are. I feel no compulsion to end you. You're welcome. But as soon as I'm not becoming a Christian, I am. You better watch out. Just a joke. So be clear. It doesn't mean, please, I'm being adamant about this. It does not mean evolutionists or skeptics or atheists or non-Christians are more likely to do the immoral thing. I don't think I find that compelling. What I'm saying is I see no moral grounds not to do whatever you want when you want to do it, especially if it helps your survival or your kid's survival. Why not steal medicine all the time out of pharmacies? Why not beat up anybody who takes the last medicine? Why not do any of that? And so that's my fourth reason why I don't think evolution comes, because the answer is, well, we all know it's wrong to do it. I would say, I agree with you. I agree with you, but you can't believe that as an evolutionist. Let me pause there for a second. Those are the big three common answers given by most non-theists. It's not the only way, but non-theist. People who don't believe in a higher power, you might say, non-theist. Again, go read them if you want. Go read the atheist author. Go read them. Go read Michael Roos. Go read Quentin Smith. Go read Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris. You can read these people and hear their arguments for it. If you want to read more about it, go do it. And I'm not trying all to caricature their view. These are very common views and very common responses. And so there you go. Any questions or comments about that? A fourth one that most people don't even think about because they're not that nerdy. Philosophers love to do it. And that is old Plato. Plato lived a long time ago. And he believed that the ideal is what exists, right? We're just the shadows and the ideal is out there. So people who are Platonists, they believe in Platonism, that's the idea that morality is objective. The moral value of justice is real. But it's not from evolution, it's not from science, not from nature. It just exists out there somewhere. So it's real, but it's independent of us. It's just out there. And they would say things like the theory that numbers, or this is what Platonists would say, theories like that numbers or other abstract objects are objective, timeless entities, independent of the physical world and of the symbols used to represent them. So before the universe was ever formed, they would say the concept of 2 + 2 and 4 was out there. That justice was already out there. Before there was ways to write it or conceive it, it's just, they're timeless entities, objective. And some philosophers are Platonists. They think that's how moral values are. They would say it's objective, it's real. Where does it come from? It doesn't come from anywhere. They're just out there in reality. Not literally floating, but they're just independent of humans. I don't find that compelling because, again, how would they exist? What are their origin? But here's the real problem is, why do these timeless objective entities have an oughtness quality versus an is quality? If there's a thing floating in space, I'm being silly, called justice, why is it good to be just? If 2 + 2 = 4 is floating in space, it's not good to be 4, it's just 4. There's a difference. Morality is what I ought to do, what I should do. And abstract objects floating around, wherever they are at, seem to have no causal oughtness properties to them at all. If that's pretty abstract, it's because it is. But there are some philosophers who hold this view. Most people don't really think about it because they're not Platonists, but there we go. So I don't find it compelling. I don't think it's an oughtness. I don't think it's the best explanation for morality. I think it doesn't explain why they exist, where they come from, and why do we have an oughtness quality. Okay, the last one is this one. This is the one I find most compelling. So divine command theory. Okay, any questions, comments? Come with the word. Divine command theory is the claim that morality is ultimately based on the commands or character of God. Two different things. And I'm going to tell you which one I believe in the most. But you can both fall in the category. Divine command theory is that morality is ultimately based on the commands or the character of God. And that the morally right action is the one that God commands or requires. So let me say it this way. Where do moral values come from? If you're a divine command theorist, you believe that moral values come either from the commandments of God or from his character. Where do moral duties come from? They would say what God commands. Values and duties. Do I need to draw that here? So, God, let's say his character and his commandments. Or you can say duties. This is divine command. So where do moral values come from? Some divine command theorists say the values that we have, like justice and morality, goodness, or whatever, that comes from his commandments. These are where values come from. Some say it comes from his commandments themselves. Some say the values come from his character. I think they come from his character. I'll tell you in a second. Where do moral duties come from? Everybody agrees they come from his commandments. Because that's where we get the oughtness from. Where we disagree is where the values come from. His character and his commandments. Does that make sense to you so far? Mm-hmm. If you can see it. It's at this point that every single person is going to bring up what's called Euthyphro's dilemma. Okay, Plato wrote a book on Euthyphro. And this, let me stay here with you here because this is, you'll get it. You'll get it. This is the common response to this belief amongst everyone I just dismissed or argued against. They're going to say, I'm waiting for David to say it, divine command theory, but when he does, I want to nail him with Euthyphro dilemma and show him that there's no way out of it. I got him. And that's fair, but let's look at it and see if there's a response. In this dialogue, Euthyphro tries to explain to Socrates that, this is very, very old, right? He tries to explain to Socrates that piety, goodness, is what the gods love. Socrates then asks Euthyphro, listen, whether the gods love the pious, love the good, because they are good, or whether the pious are good because the gods love them. To put the dilemma in modern terms, that genocide is wrong. Let's say genocide is wrong because it's contrary to God's will. We can ask this another way. God forbids genocide. Does God forbid genocide because it's wrong? Or is it wrong and that's why God forbids it? So is something good because God wills it? Or does he only will what is good? Well, David, who gives a rip? Well, here's the problem. Here's the dilemma comes in. Because if you say something is good, a moral value, because he commands it, then it seems to be arbitrary. For example, God says, say God commands, don't commit genocide as a commandment. Then the question is, what if God did command you to commit genocide? If you go this route, you have to say, it'd be good, because whatever he commands is good. Does that make sense? Because it's flip-floppy, it sounds like it's just purely arbitrary. But if it's arbitrary, most people who are moral philosophers, like us in this room, would say, that's not morality is. It's not arbitrary. That it's not. But you could respond to this person who says it is commandment, it's not arbitrary, it just is. It's just, that's the way it is. So that's why most people who oppose the divine command theory oppose it by saying you have a genuine dilemma. If what is good, moral values come from the commands, that's purely arbitrary. But if the other makes it confusing is, if God chooses, say, justice is a good, and he commands it because it is good, the question is, well, why is it good? It sounds like there's a moral law above God. Like had a bunch of apples to choose from above him called good apples. There's justice. I'll command that one. The question is, why was that good? So does it command it because it is good? Well, where did he get the goodness from?
He is good. I mean, he is the author of goodness. So anything he commands has to be good.
We'll go there in just a second. That's good. Good. So this is the key, though. I'm trying to explain this as best I can. In divine command theory, they would say, if you hold this view, that moral values and duties come from God's commandment, the divine command theory, then you have a dilemma. I'll give it one more time. Does God command murder because does he prohibit, let me say a positive sense. Is it good to tell the truth and that's why he commands it? Then it sounds like there's a moral law above God. It's good to tell the truth, so he picks that one. Or is it good because he commands it? But if that's true, it sounds like morality is arbitrary. He could just as easily command you to lie. You go, oh, that's good. They say, no, that's not good. It's different. It couldn't happen that way.
But God can't do that.
Well, at least
everything he commands has to be good because they come from him.
Well, that's the response. The response to the supposed dilemma is, it's not a dilemma. It depends on how you understand divine command theory. If you don't define divine command theory as this, I'm going to erase this on the board and erase values from commandments and say they come from different aspects, that the moral values come from his character and moral duties come from commandments, there's no more dilemma. And that goes back to what John just said. That would mean God chooses the good because he is good. He is good. That is, it's not an apple above him. He commands it because he can only tell the truth. He's moral perfection.
He's the author of truth.
He's the author of truth.
And all things good.
And all things good. He's the standard of goodness, which is why he commands us to be good. So the answer is, well, why say tell the truth? It's not because he's got, back to my analogy, a bunch of good apples and he goes, tell the truth, oh, that's a good one. No, he commands tell the truth because he tells the truth. And he's the standard of all morality. So that's why it's not a problem. Now, back to my handout here. The first example is called volunteerism. That values come from his will. That's volunteerism. There's not really a name for the other view, the one we just talked about, that John brought up. But often you might call this in literature called essentialism, in God's essential character. So that's why I call this, it's volunteerism versus essentialism, or values from his will or his commandments versus values from his character. That is my view. My view is that where do moral values come from? Moral values come from God's character. So values, one more time, I'm going to repeat this, then we'll move on. Values concern the moral worth of something, whether it's good or bad. Duties are whether they're obligatory, whether it's right or wrong. Volunteerism seems to make moral values arbitrary, like raping could be good if you told you to. Essentialism argues that his essential moral properties, the good flows from his nature or his character. God by nature is essentially good, loving, kind, faithful, just, loyal, truthful, et al. God's nature or character is the standard of the morality of an action. These properties are good because God possesses them. They are descriptions of the way God is, and therefore these are goods. Those aren't arbitrary. They can't be. This is very important to understand. Because then people say, David, being honest, that property of God, that's just arbitrary. He could have different properties. His character, he could be a liar. The response to that is no. The reason why that cannot happen is because I don't like it. No. The reason why that can't happen is because that's logically inconsistent. That is to say, we get God the way he is. And God, by definition, in every form of theism, is a morally perfect being, which means it can't be changed.
So his character defines his will.
His character defines his will, yes. Yes, his character defines his will, and he cannot change his character. That's not a fault, that's a perfection. When I take my daughter's vocabulary test, I cannot fail. Well, David's just so dumb, he's imperfect. No, it's because I know perfectly what the answers are. So he cannot change his character because it's who he is. He is, by definition, in all possible worlds. There is no possible world in which God lacks these properties and does not exist. If God exists, he He, by definition, is the perfect moral standard. So the properties of loving, faithfulness, loyalty, all these things cannot be otherwise. So let me put this on this is a fine point. And I got 2 big points to this. This is good stuff. I know you sound like I am. People say, well, David, if God commanded you to kill your daughter, would you do it? And I'd say you wouldn't do that. Hypothetically, if you did it. If he said go murder someone, would you do it? If he said rape someone, would you do it? Hypothetically. What's your response to that?
No, not his character.
Right. No, not no that I wouldn't do it, but what?
It's not from God.
It's not from God.
Yeah.
That is to say, it's a nonsensical question. It's a stupid question. It's like asking, if God could draw a square circle, what would it look like? You can ask the word, C.S. Lewis said this perfectly. You can add the word God to every question you want. It doesn't make it sensible. It's a dumb question. No, hypothetically. If you could be the married bachelor, what would he do? You mean God can't do that? I think only Thomas Aquinas is the only philosopher I know of at all, but almost every Christian philosopher ever has said God cannot do the logically impossible because it's nonsense. Not because he's limited, because he's the flowing of all logic. So he can't make a square circle, a married bachelor, a stone too big he can't move. These are stupid. They're stupid questions. So what if hypothetically, if he told you to go murder and pillage, the answer is he would never do that. Why not? Because that's his character. He, by definition, is the standard of moral perfection. He would never command something against his character. Couldn't happen. It logically can't happen.
What about in the Bible where he commanded...
Don't bring up the Bible. That doesn't matter. Go ahead. What about the Bible? Hang on, I'm teasing. Go ahead.
They commanded to kill his son.
Let's say that one more time. Who commanded who to kill his son?
God commanded, isn't that basically the...
Right, which is why I changed it to murder, to rape. Yeah, it was a slip. Because most people... Right, because my response to someone that says, what if God told you to kill your daughter, would you do it? And I said, if God told me to, sure I would. Okay. The question is, because biblically there's tons of precedent for that God does in fact command, according to the Bible. Now maybe they were mistaken, but the Israelites thought they were commanded by God to go kill certain people at certain times, in rare instances.
Genocide.
Not genocide. They're never committed genocide.
Kill everyone in the...
Yeah, that's... Well, okay, you're talking... Yeah. Those are good questions, but they don't count, and I'll tell you why, maybe afterwards, or maybe next time we talk about. Because when we get to the end of this, I want to look at particular biblical examples of those kind of issues.
Okay, move on.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not being dismissive. It is a good question. What about when God commands, go kill all the mother and father and everything that living and breathes, whatever? Before I get to that, in the next couple weeks, go read the book, The Lost World of the Conquest. The Lost World of the Conquest. It'll answer all your questions.
Is that a commandment?
It is a commandment. If you want to know the right answer, go read The Lost World of the Conquest. Just came out by John Walton and his son, The Lost World of the Conquest. The 2 big corollaries I'm trying to make sure we understand is that there is no example ever, hypothetically, where God would go against his very character. Okay. So in the values versus duties, I see moral duties as rooted in the commandments, moral values rooted in the nature of God. But what follows from that is, stay with me here, what follows from these values versus duty, the values come from his character, duties come from his commandments, is, I don't believe, I agree with William Lane Craig and other Christian philosophers, biblically speaking, a lot of confusion that comes from biblical understanding of what God commands or doesn't command is predicated on the assumption that God issues commandments, moral duties, to himself like he does us. I don't find that compelling. I do not think God has the same moral duties as you and I do. For example, how could God dare he take human life? When we're told explicitly don't do that in general, certainly in Christianity, we're not doing that, which is, I'm trying to make things short because like you asked the question, and I'm thinking this now, I should say it. You said, what if God commanded, like I said, kill Julia? And I said, well, I should have said the word, what I all have said. If I said, yeah, but if he did, I would do it. But I'm also thinking, based on Christian theology, I understand he wouldn't command that now. There might have been a time in the history of the world where he might have commanded that, but not now. Because God's moral commandments and duties, I'm convinced, have changed over time. And they're contextualized. So it's, to me, if someone said, if God commands you to go kill your daughter, I would convince, and I heard that voice, I would be convinced I heard the wrong voice. I would be convinced God did not give me that commandment or that duty because of the New Testament, and that's a biblical issue. Okay, Jesus would have to show up and tell me himself, I guess, before I did ever that, because I'm convinced that's outside of his character. Okay, back to life. How dare God ever tell anybody that he can take their life? Well, God does not have the moral duty to preserve your life or mine for a billionth of a second. We're told not to enact vengeance because vengeance is mine, declares the Lord. And that's all through the Bible, Old New Testament. The assumption is you and I are not just. That when we enact vengeance, we're doing partly out of rage or hatred or whatever. But God does not do it out of rage or hatred. He does it because he's perfectly just, perfectly fair when he institutes any kind of judgment. God has that moral right in his character. So there are duties that I have that he does not have. But we know that instinctively. We know we know it. If Nanny's precious girls, I care about them, I love them, and if they were in danger near me, I would do everything, like my own children, I would take care of them. And I would. But that's supererogatory. That is, it's above and beyond. But I'm a brother in Christ, but also just because I'm a Christian, I would do that. But as a brother in Christ, I would certainly do it. But in general, I'm not morally responsible for making sure their precious daughters are taken care of and fed and clothed and bathed. That's their responsibility. I do not have the moral duty to do that. Now, why is that? Because I'm not their parents. I'm not their parents. There's a moral duty that they have that I do not have because of the nature of the relationship. And that's how it is all the time. We all get that instinctively. That's how it is with God. There are commandments we have and duties we have that he does not have because of the nature of the relationship of the thing that is being overseen. Another kind of analogy is, I use this often, is I drive a pickup truck. If I go to my truck, it's almost always parked in the driveway. And because Kansans don't know anything about trucks. They don't do parking lots correctly. They don't do parking spots correctly. They don't make garages for trucks. Ever. And I'm very upset about that. I'm so praying that God heals me from the wounds of... So I have to park in the driveway. They don't know how to make a garage. So it's such a rich person problem. My little tour garage? No. Oh, I'm just teasing, of course. It is a little frustrating. But my truck's in the driveway. You go by and Deborah sees me out there with a bat, beating in my truck. Boom, boom, boom. And I'm slashing the tires. It's my... And Deborah goes, and someone goes, "What's he doing?" Nobody would say, "How dare he do that? Who does he think he is?" You would laugh at it. You think I've gone crazy. I got in a fight with my truck and I'm winning. You might think all kinds of stuff, which you would never think. You would never intuit. You would never believe is that I'm doing something immoral. Now, why is that? It is... It's an object. It's my object. It's my truck. I'll do whatever I want to do with my truck.
It's God's truck too, though.
It's God's truck too, though. Yeah. It's God's truck and everything here. That's right. Which is why it's one of the reasons I take care of my truck, because I respect it as an object that he has given me. So as a Christian, you might say, you shouldn't do that because if it's God's, you should have the moral duty not to do that. Right. But in general, that's only because in a Christian worldview, that it's a moral value we have been revealed, we believe, right? But in general, intuitively, most people wouldn't give a rip that I'm slashing the tires of my own truck. It's yours. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't rip my own truck up. But what if I went next door where they have the minivan, I start slashing their tires, and they saw me do it. I'm slashing tires with the same knife, same acts of pressure, instantaneously. The point is, I have a moral duty. People say a value is, I cannot hurt other people's property. I have a moral duty to preserve that, respect their boundaries. I don't have a moral duty to respect my own, outside the Christian value, but in general. And that's how it is with moral duties in general. God is under no obligation. And this is one of the hardest things, I think, for people to grasp. I really mean it, especially when they're in sorrow. God is under no obligation to make sure you and I are happy. He's under no obligation to make sure you live for one more second. See, we're so accustomed to lifespans. And so the older they are, they die. They go, yeah, they lived what? A long life. So we have emotional closure. That's right. It's just. It's fair because they live a long time. But when a child dies, everybody says it's not right. It's not fair. The assumption is, and I'm saying this in a cold, distant way, I'm sorry, the assumption is that we have a moral right, it's a moral value to live a long life, that God has a moral duty to sustain our life for as long as we want it. That's false. That's false. At no time in the Christian worldview ever does God ever say we have the moral right to live life in the first place. It is a gift. And at no time in the biblical tradition do we ever say that God has a moral duty to make sure we're happy and live a long, happy life, fulfilled, and have a big, fat retirement, and have tons of cash, and we're always happy, and no one disappoints us. And that nothing ever happens badly to us. That's a pagan, that's a non-Christian belief of the world. That's not a Christian worldview. The Christian worldview, that's not true. And this is so fundamental. I find this to be true. In my line of work, I'm around a lot of death and dying. And it is sad when children die. It's sad. It absolutely breaks my heart. Sadness is one thing, loss is one thing. But the sense of injustice is different. That's a moral value. We think it's unfair. God has broken his own moral commandments because we know if he were good, if his character were good, he would have given this person life for the next 76 years. My response is, why do you think that? Maybe that is true, but it's not true of the Christian understanding of God. That means we're duped because that's nowhere in the biblical worldview at all. Life every second is just a gift. That's all it is, yeah.
Water has the right.
Go on 1 second. Go ahead. Hold on 1 second. Go ahead, Vanna.
But he is with us.
He's with us. Absolutely, he's with
always,
us.
But
He is always with us.
He's happy and filled about things. Yeah.
He is always with us no matter what we go through. Absolutely is. That's a fact, whether we believe it or not, whether you feel it or not.
And a lot of times I think people equate those two things. If he was here, why didn't he stop this?
That's exactly right. Yes, they do. If God were here, why didn't he stop it? But, I mean, I've heard this over and over. A family I know, our next door neighbors, and this is back in Houston, their son committed suicide. I was there at the hospital right after it happened. I was at Cracker Barrel and finished breakfast, and I fled there, and he had just died. And the first thing out of her mouth is, why didn't God stop it? Right, so this goes on to this day. I don't know, but she blamed me for a long time. She finally took all that rage toward me and started being very hateful because she couldn't let go of it. She couldn't let the fact. And so when I said, I'll pray for your healing or whatever, it just made her angry. And so this sense of sadness mixed with a sense of injustice that fuels each other. And what I'm saying is, in a cold-hearted way right now, is they're not the same thing. A moral issue is different. It's just different. And the assumption that God should have protected, should have preserved life, is assuming God has commanded to himself that he's got to preserve our life and make sure no harm happens to us. And I'm saying I find no reason in the biblical worldview to think that. Yeah.
And if we do put...
Yeah, if we put that box around God, we're making him who we want him to be versus who he is. Yeah. And, you know, in all fairness, I think people develop this sense of it's not fair based on a pattern. That is, in general, humans live a, quote, long life. Well, long life 100 years ago was 50. So what happens over time in cultures is the lifespan has changed, and so we get acclimated to that. And so we think, therefore, because that's what we're accustomed to, we have the right to it. My question is, where does that sense of where does that right come? Why is that a moral value? The Christian value is it is not. Whether we die at birth or we die at 300 years old, it's just a gift. Yes, ma'am.
We just take a lot for granted.
Take it for granted. And it's easy for me to take it for granted. We make plans, 20 years, retirement, like the book of James when he says, what in the world are you doing? You don't do that. You don't make plans about that. You just, if God wills it, yeah, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to back up the truck.
Back it up. Beep, beep.
Okay. God is perfect.
God is morally perfect,
All-knowing.
all-knowing.
Why would he change his character for us?
Why would he change his character for us? I don't think he has changed his character.
You said that earlier. You said that you feel that he has changed his character.
I didn't mean character. I mean his moral commandments. My fault.
Okay.
I don't think God's changed his character. I meant the way he's expressing his character.
Okay.
In my mind, it was perfectly clear. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that's a great question. So to be real clear, I don't think God has changed his character. I think that's logically impossible. I think God has changed the way he expresses his character, what he desires, his moral duties. And I said this in sermons, I'll keep saying it. For example, what God required of the Israelites under a absolutely theocratic, priestly governed covenantal relationship, those moral duties are very different than what Christians go through. And I'm not being mean when I say this, but I get so frustrated when I hear atheists in debates when I hear these debates, and they go, I mean, we'll look at Leviticus and look at so-and-so. They're so ignorant about the way Christians for centuries have understood moral obligation. No Christian thinks we live in a theocracy. We're not ancient Israel. And so those commandments have changed. In Christian theology, we have a term for that. It's called progressive revelation. God has revealed not only revealed more of his character, he's also changed his moral duties over time. And as a Christian, I'm convinced the end of it all was with Jesus. That is, I don't need another prophet, Muhammad. He's the final show. So everything he understands about his character when he commands now is complete, and the canon is closed and so forth. So thank you for that, and I'm sorry to misspeak. Thank you. Any other question or comment that I said wrong?
So, in our country,
You're saying a lot of people, that America and this younger generation are entitled. Yeah, a sense of feeling that I am deserving of certain rights and privileges that I have not earned by skill or productivity or function, rather just because I exist. And that's what parents did to them. That's what parents have done. Everyone gets a trophy. Everyone gets to win. We don't hurt anybody's feelings. Everybody gets everything all the time, and they deserve it. And why? Because you deserve it, baby. You can be whatever you want to be. That's false. That's nonsense. And we're sabotaging a whole generation of people who think they're going to be absolute failures. When they get to work and they're 18, 19 years old, and they're not a millionaire. And their boss doesn't give a rip if their mommy told them they're going to make it. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But on a generic, and not all millennials that way, but that's a common theme. And we have to fight my own children all the time. And they're below millennials, right? But just to remind us again as Christians that these values versus duties are as well different. And you can have your own views. It seems to me that this is the most compelling understanding of the divine command theorist. So if I wrap this up before I go on letter 5, not tonight, as we go next time, because next time you'll see a lot more of the questions before, the sliding scale, all that stuff, we're almost there. So if someone asks the question, where does morality come from, moral ontology? My answer is, and many Christian thinkers are, that moral values are grounded in God's character, in his essence and his nature. And it could not be otherwise. We can't get a God who values lying. He's a morally perfect being. That's the definition of God, and it's exactly God revealed in the Bible. So his essential properties of God are essentially good, and then he commands things based on his character. And that's where our duties come from, our commandments come from. So when I've got to choose on those piano keys, and something says, do that one versus that one, I'm convinced that sense of commandment, that sense of oughtness, comes from God's commandments themselves. And I think my intuition picks up on it. My own little view, by the way, is that I think our soul is not material. I think our soul exists in the supernatural realm as well. Much like radio waves are here, but you can't sense them or hear them. You don't have the right antenna to pick up all the radio waves. We are being blasted, going through our cells. Radio waves, ultraviolet waves, neutrinos from the sun. It's all going through us right now all the time. But we can't sense it. We don't have the right apparatus to pick up on it. We just can't. But it's real. We can test it other ways. I think we have an apparatus for the moral law in our soul. We have a spiritual antennae. But it's defunct, it's broken because we're sinners. But when we come in Christ, the antenna gets much more in tune. And I think those signals are being sent out, as it were, instead of a radio broadcast, but from God himself. And I think our soul picks up on that, and that's what we call the moral law. That's what I think. Can't take you a Bible verse for that, but no extra charge. All right, any questions, comments? I'll wrap up.
hearing from the Holy.
Yeah, I think it's a sense of like Holy Spirit. My own view is, and I may be wrong, I don't die on this hill. I don't think the Holy Spirit's commanding us every time. Like a little angel on our shoulder going, do this one. No, don't do that. Go do that. Maybe so. I take that to be more of a sense of special inspiration. I think we have a more generalized sense of being able to pick up on the moral law. That atheists, Satan worshipers, Hitler himself could pick up on the moral law. The degree to which they're in tune with it differs on the people, on the person's individual. Psychopaths, they're way out of tune. But most people are fairly in tune and know the difference between right and wrong. That's my view. The Holy Spirit can give us revelatory messages, but I think that's a little different. I think so. Let me pray for us. Thank you, Father, Son, and Spirit, for being morally perfect. And help us continue to understand you as best as we can. Certainly there is wonderful, phenomenal mystery, which I like because it means I didn't invent you. I don't have you all figured out. But God, help us. I guess particularly I feel compelled to say as well tonight, the reminder again that life is a gift. And God, if there's anyone in this room who, Lord, I mean, certainly including myself, who thinks for a second you owe me, that somehow we're entitled to some long, productive life or whatever, help us change that and get over that silliness, because instead we know that you're really concerned about shaping our character for the time that we have on earth, so that we're enacting the kingdom of God while on earth, and we're loving and serving as much as we can. Holy Spirit, help us as well apply this in all areas of life, that when we leave this room and we make moral choices, we think about the moral values we're trying to uphold, the moral values we're trying to reject. Please also help us when we do study Scripture, as Tom started us to ask earlier. Please help us when we read Scripture to think clearly about those things as we go along, so that we're better disciples. For other burdens I don't know about, worries and stressors from my sisters and brothers in this room, we give those to you. Help us feel your peace that passes understanding. Help us genuinely come in line, in tune with what you want. And please give us the courage to do what you want. Or as Jesus said, to deny our wills, pick up our crosses, to follow you. In the name of Jesus we pray, amen.